Hello friends, it is wonderful to have you with me again today. We are going to be taking a look at King Henry V, son of Henry IV, and you'll remember that poor old Henry IV, albeit he was a good ruler, was plagued by rebellions and people trying to steal his throne, and unfortunately he pretty much died of stress. And for all of you guys who are following along with these Kings and Queens videos, I've made a handy little playlist up here that you can catch up on all of the Kings and Queens videos, and every time a new video is posted you'll be able to find it in the playlist so you don't miss any videos. Alright, so let's look at Henry V. And I think this is where everything starts to get interesting. So Henry V, he lived from the 9th of August 1386 to the 31st of August 1422, and he reigned from the 20th of March 1413 to the 31st of August 1422. Henry V was a super serious king, more obsessed with fighting than fun. As soon as he came to the throne, Henry picked a fight with the French, demanding he be the next king of France. At first, no one in France took him seriously, but that all changed after the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. By the time he reached Paris, the French king was ready to give in, and Henry was told he would be the heir to the throne of France. Wow, that didn't take the French a lot of convincing, did it? Alright, so William Shakespeare wrote 3 plays about Henry IV and Henry V. He made out that when Henry V was still just a prince, he was quite a lad. According to Shakespeare, Henry was always out partying, drinking, and not behaving in a prince-like way at all. It seems that Shakespeare may have just made this all up because Henry V turned out to be a very sober king. He had already started joining in battles in his early teens, fighting for his father against Welsh rebellions, and getting wounded in the face with an arrow when he was just 16. The Battle of Agincourt was a decisive victory for Henry's troops against the numerically superior French forces. After this, Henry was allowed to marry the French princess Catherine of Valois, and told he would be the heir to the throne of France. Henry and Catherine had a son, the future Henry VI. Henry V died suddenly in August 1422, just 2 years after his marriage, aged only 35, so he didn't get to be the King of France after all. I suspect foul play here. Questionable kingship. It was said that Henry V waited beside his dying dad's bedside. When Henry IV closed his eyes, the young king snatched up the crown and tried it on Versailles. Ooh, he sounds horrible. Military might. Henry V spent most of his reign fighting battles abroad. His big project was to conquer France. Unlike most European rulers who had big armies made up of any poor chap who would be dragged into battle, Henry preferred to have trained and well-paid fighters who used powerful longbows. I would be under the same thought process. I think, isn't there a saying, a army? Oh no, that's a different saying. But anyway, I'd rather have a lot of really good fighters than a whole bunch of people who didn't know how to fight. Their most famous victory was the Battle of Agincourt, where Henry's relatively small army defeated a French force that was at least 4 times bigger. That just goes to prove that well-paid fighters are much better than a whole bunch of poor people just given a sword in their hands. So we don't have a lot of information on Henry V here, unfortunately. But let's look at the painting. Oh, he just looked like a bit of a smarmy kind of a guy. I mean, what is this haircut? Wow. I mean, that's a fashion statement. He has no facial hair, which is quite dissimilar to all the kings that we have seen previous. He's got kind of like this dead look in his eye. He's got murder on the mind, I'm sure. He has this kind of long aquiline kind of nose, and he is quite plain looking, just with these adornments of like rings and a chain of, I don't know, regal chain or whatever. He doesn't look fun whatsoever. So let's have a look at the timeline here. So in 1386, Henry is born. In 1413, Henry V succeeds to the throne. And in 1415, we have the Battle of Agincourt. The Daily Monarch tells us that at the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V led his troops to victory against a numerically superior French army commanded by Constable Charles d'Albret. The French troops were crippled, and Henry's marriage to Catherine of Valois, daughter of the French king, cements his victory. And in 1422, Henry V dies. He doesn't even become king. So let's look at some people here. Mary the Bowen, we've already looked at her, that's his mum. Catherine of Valois, let's have a look here at Queen Catherine. She was born in 1401 and she died in 1437. Catherine was the wife of Henry V. After his death, she fell in love with a Welshman named Owen Tudor, who she later married. Catherine gave birth to 3 sons. The eldest, Edmund, Earl of Richmond, would himself father a king, Henry VII, the first of the Tudor line. At the end of her life, she retired to Bermondsey Abbey. So, we've looked at everybody else here. So, let's take the quiz and see how much we can remember. Question 1 of 4. Which famous battle did Henry V win against the French? Was it the Battle of Bosworth? Was it the Battle of Waterloo? Was it the Battle of Agincourt? Or the Battle of Crecy? I'm going with the Battle of Agincourt. Correct. Henry V fought his way to victory at the Battle of Agincourt. Question 2 of 4. Henry V was happy to include anyone in his army. Was that true or was that false? Well, that was false, because he preferred more skilled soldiers than just random people on the street. Henry V wanted a small army of well-paid and highly trained soldiers, which ultimately this tactic won him the Battle of Agincourt. Question 3 of 4. Who was Henry V's French princess? Was it Isabella of France? years after his marriage to Catherine. How old was he? Was he 28, 52, 40, 35? I'm going to go for 35 because I remembered it's quite close to my own age and I found that quite scary. So correct, Henry V was just 35 when he died. So we got 4 crowns out of 4. So in a way, I kind of feel really sorry for Henry V. I mean, he to me, he was a guy who knew what he wanted. He wanted that French throne to himself, and he actually managed to get it. But unfortunately, he died before he could be crowned the King of France. And I wondered if, he survived longer than his 35 years, what difference that would have made for England and France and all of that sort of stuff. He did seem like a bit of an arse because he literally waited for his dad to die before, snatching the crown for himself. I think it kind of shows that he literally had one thing on his mind, just to rule and be a really powerful king. But he did have his head screwed on because he didn't want any old pauper fighting for him. He wanted really good soldiers who were paid well and were loyal, which ultimately won him France. So that is Henry V. And next time we will be moving on to Henry VI. So thank you. Oh, can you see this little thing? I love it when it does that. And it does a little animated thing. Oh, it's not going to do it now. I wonder if I can quickly do it for you. Come on. Hello. Anyway, it was an arrow coming past like this because he got injured in the face. Oh, that's probably why he's looking like that. Like you can't see his right side. It's probably because that's where his injury was and he didn't want anybody to see it. That's interesting.